One of the questions I see asked more often about Plethora X5 or any other multi-effects is how do you integrate it into your existing rig, or how do you expand upon it? Say you have fuzz pedal or an overdrive pedal, where do you place them with regards to the plethora? Do you place your boosts, your graphic EQs, or if you want some other flavor of delay, where do you put all this? In this video I'm going to show you 10 ways of doing it. Of course, the easiest way of integrating the plethora into an existing rig is not having a rig at all, and just using the plethora, the guitar, and the amp. If your amp gives you everything you need in terms of tone shaping tools and gain and drive and all of that stuff, and the only thing you require is modulation effects, compressor, time-based, delay, reverbs, then the plethora might actually be all you need. Even if you need to push your amp a bit with a touch of mid-boost or something, check out this video where I tell you how to turn the hypergravity into a mid-boost. I'll also include a few links down in the description box to a few videos that I've done using nothing but the plethora and an amp or an amp type device, in this case an atomic amplifier box, so that you can see how versatile the plethora can be when used on its own. So that was setup number one. In setup number two, we're going to start integrating other pedals into this thing, and we're going to start with a fuzz pedal. When it comes to fuzz pedals, my personal preference is to put them as close as I can to the guitar in the signal chain. So in this case, I have the guitar, I have the cable, and the DoD Carcosa. It's the first thing on the chain, and then I go from the Carcosa to the plethora's input. Not all fuzzes are particularly picky about where they are on the signal chain. This one isn't, but there are some that are, and you might want to experiment with that. My personal preference would always be put your fuzz pedals before the plethora. Next up, boost pedal. In setup number three, we've added the spark booster. This is now after my plethora, so my guitar signal path is guitar into my fuzz, which is off for this situation, into the plethora, into the spark booster. So as I said before, this is a matter of personal preference, but all of the pedals that I want to use to push the front end of the amplifier, I kind of want them to be next to the front end of the amplifier. That way I can goose the gain and the level on my booster, or I can use an overdrive to push the preamp into saturation. And I want to be able to do this without anything between them in the way of digital processing or converters or any such device. Because here's the thing, the plethora's buffers and converters are very good, but they're still converters. So the moment your guitar signal gets into the plethora, it gets converted to digital, and then it gets reconverted to analog so that it can carry on through. Okay, enough nerdery. It's not wrong, per se, it's just a matter of personal preference, as I said. Anything that I want to push an analog preamp, I will want to keep in the analog domain, i.e. just before the preamp. In the next setup, we're going to see where we can put an effect that the plethora doesn't have. In this case, Digitech Freakout. In rig number 4, we are still using the Plethora into the front of the amp. As you could hear in the previous example, the moment I start driving up the gain, all of your delays and reverbs start being mushed, because I am driving the preamp into overdrive, so it's compressing and dirtying up the reverbs and delays, and all of the stuff is getting a bit mushy. Can sound awesome. But now we are taking advantage of the Plethora's built-in effects loop to place another effect in between all of the effects chain. And not only that, but I'm using the Plethora's capability of mapping the effects loop into one of the foot switches to remotely control when my external effect comes in and out. So the only thing I need to do is plug it in. I know that my cabling isn't going to win any beauty contest today, I'm sorry. So I just need to turn my effect on, the freak out, and then to have it come in and out, I just treat it as if it was any other effect inside the Plethora, so off and on. And of course, if I want to, I can also change the location of the effects loop inside the Plethora's signal chain. So I can have it coming straight in the beginning, so I can swap it with what was the viscous vibe, or I can put it wherever I want in the chain. In this case, I've swapped it with a compressor and put it in third place. It's the flexibility of the Plethora. It allows you to do this in real time. So consider this for the effects that the Plethora doesn't have. You can also use distortion pedals in here if you want, or overdrive pedals. As I said before, the buffers and converters of the Plethora are really good. To me, it's just a matter of personal preference to put them after the Plethora. In the next setup, we are going to change this entirely and start using the effects loop of the amp. So this is now setup number 5. And as you can see in the graphic next to me, I am now running my guitar straight into my Carcosa, into my Spark, into the front of the amp. So in this case, I would run all of my drives, all of my distortions straight into the front of the amp, where they will live very happily, and I will be very happy to. And I am running just the Plethora in the effects loop of the Marshall. In theory, all of my time-based effects, all of my modulations can live in a relatively clean space after all of the dirt from the preamp. Or can they? No, they can't. Because this is a Marshall, and to get the typical Marshall sound, I am driving not just the preamp, but also the power amp into saturation. So the more I drive the preamp, the more the power amp distorts too. If you have watched my 4-cable method video, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's there, the link, or there, down in the links. Go watch it, and if you don't know why this is happening, why my effects are getting a bit mushed up, you will understand why in that video. That said, it's a really lovely place to keep your modulation if you don't mind having this slightly smudged thing. In the next setup, we are going to start using up more pedals around the Plethora while keeping our front of the amp. It's not clean, is it? Because all of the distortion is there. But we're going to keep the front of the amp simple and play around with the effects loop. So we're now in rig number 6, and it's starting to be very difficult to wipe the smile off my face because this is fun. As you can see in the schematic, I still have my drives in the front of the amp, I still have the Plethora in the effects loop of the amp, but now I've got a few companions. I have a Boss EQ200 before the Plethora, so my signal path is now Marshall from the effects loop, effects send into my Boss EQ200, into my Plethora. In the effects loop of the Plethora, I've got the amazing New X Rock, I think it's New X, Rock Tree, i.e. the rotary speaker emulation. So Plethora goes into the Rock Tree, comes back, and it goes out into the Boss DD200. And I'm using the DD200 because there's a few modes that the Plethora doesn't have. You could put the DD200 in the middle, you could put the Rockery there. At this point, it's up to you to experiment with what your rig will sound like. I like to use mine this way because I can treat my Rockery as just another modulation that I can have at my feet here, because once again I have it mapped to the switch, so it becomes more instinctive to me. And as you can hear, you can have tons of fun with this. In the next rig, we're going to clean this up again and go back to just using the Plethora and the Marshall, but this time with a whole bunch of cables. As you probably guessed by now, rig number 7 is the 4-cable method. So again, if you haven't watched the video yet, go find the link in the description. I have a full video about the 4-cable method and why it might not be the most appropriate system for you, even though it's very flexible. And because I've explained that in very great detail in that video, I'm not going to explain too much here. The only thing I'm going to say is what you can see in the schematic: guitar into Plethora, effect send to the preamp, effect send of the amplifier into the return of the Plethora, and the output of the Plethora into the effects return. What that means is that you can now split the Plethora and have effects that go before your preamp and effects that go between your preamp and your power amp. It's simple, it's flexible, it requires a few cables, but hey, without cables you can't have fun. In the next setup, we're going to start populating these cables. So rig number 8 is in essence the 4-cable method, but this time with a pedal in the middle of each one of the cables. I'm still sticking to the principles that I established earlier on in this video, i.e. my fuzz is still after my guitar, and I'm pushing my amp with an overdrive pedal, in this case the Taishi, so I replaced the Spark with the Taishi. So my signal path is guitar Carcosa, into the first half of the Plethora, into the Taishi, into the amp. The output of the amp comes into an EQ, into the second half of the Plethora, and into the Boss DD200. Obviously you can replace these with whatever pedals you have, but try sticking to these principles. Pedals that want to see your guitar first here, pedals that want to push your amp here, and modulations, time-based effects all in the secondary loop established between the Plethora and the effects loop of your amplifier. If you've watched the 4-cable method video, you know what's coming next. You guessed it, it's the 4-ish cable method. So we are bypassing the effects loop of the amplifier, and we're now using the torpedo captor as a part of the system. So we're getting the DI output of the torpedo captor straight into the Boss EQ200, into the Plethora, and now in stereo out of the Plethora into the DD200, and in stereo out of the DD200 into my recording rig. As I had said in the 4-cable method video, the big advantage of this is now your effects come out with pristine quality. You can also set up very easily a wet dry wet rig by taking the parallel output of the torpedo captor into your guitar cabinet so that it is being amplified by your main amplifier, and the final output, in this case of the Boss DD200, if you're not using it, it could be the output of the Plethora, straight into either a power amp or a desk or a pair of FR speakers, and you can very easily create wet dry wet, so mono, dry, stereo, wet. There is absolutely no way that I can convey to you over a recording how amazing that sounds. So if you have the possibility of testing this out for yourself, please go do it. It's awesome. So there's only one setup left to go, which is going to be, again, a bit cleaner than this. It's going to have another added advantage and another couple of tricks up its sleeve. So I'll see you in a second. Finally, rig number 10. It is kind of a return to basics, so it's mixing what we've seen before of just keeping the drive section into the front of the amp, but this time, instead of integrating the Plethora only in the amp's effects loop, we are still keeping the torpedo captor or the load box with the eye out as an integral part of the system. So I'm taking the output from the amp into the torpedo, that then comes into my effects. Big advantage of this, I can now bring a mono signal into the Roctory and take a stereo signal out of the Roctory into the Plethora and keep everything stereo from there onwards. Having a rotary speaker effect in stereo is absolutely awesome, and I want to use it in stereo whenever I can. Why couldn't I do this before? Because I was using the effects loop in the Plethora, which is mono. So what it means is if you plug in something in stereo into the Plethora, but are using the effects loop in the Plethora, because it's mono, it's going to sum everything to mono before the effects loop, go out, process, come back, and then split that mono signal into stereo again. So whatever was plugged in is in effect summed to mono, and all of the stereo information is lost right there. If I'm using this type of system where I want to keep something in stereo before returning to the Plethora, I can't use the effects loop. It's still an extremely versatile system. Obviously, I could add all kinds of pedals here. If I wanted to use an external looper that would sync to something else, I could put it either in mono before or in stereo after. Another tape delay emulation. I'm covered. The Plethora and the Boss have excellent tape delay emulations, but who knows? You might have something that you really want to use, or even another compressor pedal. You might want to put it where your drives are, not a spectator sport. Take your pedals, go and experiment with them. So there you have it. 10 ways of integrating your Plethora into your rig. As I said before, this isn't a spectator sport, so take your multi-effects unit or your Plethora X5, take your other pedals and your amp and just play with it, see what goes where. Try your distortion boxes before the Plethora, after the Plethora, before your amp. Try mixing and matching your modulation and time-based effects before or after the Plethora. See what works for you. And if you found the video to be useful, you know what to do. Like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and if you want to be notified whenever I release more videos about guitars or pedals or how to set up your own rig, click the notification bell. I also want to extend a huge thank you to everybody who's already bought me coffees and is helping keeping the lights on the channel. If you would like to join the ever-growing list, please buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. If you have any other ways of connecting your rig, or if you have any doubts, anything that wasn't clearly explained, leave me a comment. That also helps the channel immensely. So I'll see you in the next video.